The chandeliers sparkled above the grand hall, each crystal catching the golden light and scattering it like diamonds across the polished marble floor. Guests whispered in awe at the magnificence of the billionaire's wedding, a union that promised to be the event of the year. Reporters waited outside, hungry for photographs of the groom, a man whose name carried weight in every business circle, and of the bride, the stunning young woman who had captured his heart. Every detail had been curated to perfection, from the ivory roses woven into the archway to the string quartet softly playing in the background. Nothing had been spared. In the front row sat the groom's son, a boy of only 9 years, dressed in a miniature tuxedo that made him look like a tiny gentleman. His dark eyes, however, did not sparkle with joy like the others. Instead, they scanned the room with quiet unease. The boy had never spoken a word since birth. Doctors called it selective mutism, therapists had tried for years, but the boy remained silent. To most people, it seemed like an unshakable wall, one that no one expected him to break. His father adored him regardless, though the fast-moving whirlwind of business and wealth often pulled the man away from the boy's side. The bride, tall and radiant in her diamond-encrusted gown, glided through the hall before the ceremony, her smile rehearsed and flawless. Guests complimented her beauty, and she accepted their words like polished coins, each one tucked away for her pride. But when her eyes fell on the little boy, her smile thinned ever so slightly. She crouched down, pretending sweetness, and whispered just low enough that no one else could hear. "You're lucky you can't talk," she murmured. "No one would listen to you anyway." She rose gracefully, turning back to the guests with laughter on her lips, but the boy's hands clenched into fists in his lap. From the altar, the billionaire scanned the room, pride swelling in his chest. He had conquered markets, built empires, and overcome rivals, yet this union, felt like the final piece of his legacy. His son sat before him, his bride was waiting, and the hall was filled with power and beauty. He believed it was all perfect. But perfection is a fragile thing. The boy shifted in his seat, his gaze darting between his father and the woman who now stood as if she were already queen of the world. Something inside him tightened. He remembered her phone calls, the way she pressed her phone to her ear late at night when she thought he was asleep. He remembered her words, sharp and cold when she thought no one was listening. Words about money, about inheritance, about tolerating the boy only until she had what she wanted. He wanted to tell his father. He wanted to scream it. But his lips, as always, refused to move. The ushers began guiding the guests into their seats. The music swelled as the ceremony was about to begin. Photographers leaned forward, ready to capture the moment that would dominate headlines by morning. The bride lifted her chin, her eyes glowing with triumph as she prepared to walk down the aisle. The billionaire straightened his cuffs, drawing a deep breath, ready to commit himself to forever. And yet, in the stillness of that moment, the boy's small fingers dug into the velvet of the pew. His heart pounded against his ribs, so loud it felt as though the whole church could hear it. He didn't know how, but deep inside he felt something was building. Something stronger than fear, stronger than silence. The guests rose to their feet as the music shifted. The bride began her slow, graceful steps down the aisle. The billionaire smiled, but in the front row, his son sat frozen, every muscle trembling as if his body knew what was coming before his mind did. For the first time in his life, the silence he had carried so long began to crack. The music faded into a softer melody as the bride reached the altar, her veil shimmering like spun silver under the cathedral lights. She took her place beside the billionaire, her hand slipping into his with practiced grace, her smile flashing to the crowd like a jewel on display. The officiant opened his book, clearing his throat, while cameras clicked from every angle. To the guests, everything was unfolding as flawlessly as they had expected. To the little boy sitting in the front pew, the air felt heavy, as though a storm pressed against the windows of the church. He shifted uncomfortably, his small shoes tapping against the marble floor. His eyes kept darting to the bride. When she thought no one was looking, her lips tightened, her gaze cooled, and the warmth drained from her expression like water slipping through cracks. He had seen that look before, when she thought only he was watching. He remembered her sharp words, the way she spoke to him like he was an inconvenience. His father never noticed. Around his father, she was always radiant, her laughter soft and tinkling like bells. The boy's chest rose and fell quickly. He wanted his father to see what he saw. He tugged lightly at the sleeve of the billionaire's suit as he stood at the altar, but his father merely gave him a distracted smile, mistaking the gesture for nerves. "It's okay, son," he whispered, not realizing the boy was trying to say something far more urgent. Frustration burned inside the child. He dug into his little jacket pocket and pulled out the small notebook he often used to communicate when gestures weren't enough. With a stubby pencil, his fingers scribbled quickly, the letters uneven but clear, "Don't trust her." He held up the notebook, angling it desperately toward his father. But the billionaire's eyes were fixed on the officiant, on the bride, on the grand moment that was slipping forward like a river current. He didn't see. The bride did. For the briefest moment, her gaze flickered downward, catching the boy's message. And then, as swiftly as she noticed, her face smoothed back into serenity. She gave a delicate laugh for the crowd, squeezing the billionaire's hand as though nothing at all had happened. But her eyes met the boy's, sharp and warning, like daggers hidden beneath silk. His small fingers tightened around the notebook until the paper wrinkled. The officiant spoke of love, of loyalty, of forever. His voice carried through the cathedral like the tolling of bells, solemn and powerful. But the boy could hear nothing over the rush of blood in his ears. His gaze flickered toward the guests, rows and rows of polished faces, all smiling, none of them aware of the truth he carried. To them, it was a fairy tale union. To him, it was a trap closing tighter with every vow. Desperation drove him to another attempt. He took his pencil again and began to draw, his small hands moving furiously over the page. A stick figure man, a stick figure woman with a crown, and a pile of money between them. He shaded the money darker, his pencil nearly breaking from the pressure. Then he scrawled a jagged line between the man and the boy, a broken family. He held it up once more, his eyes wide, pleading. A few guests noticed the motion, whispering among themselves, smiling indulgently at what they thought was a child's doodle. His father glanced for only a moment, giving a gentle nod as if to say, "I see you, son, but we'll talk later." Then his gaze returned to the bride, his smile unwavering. The boy slumped back in his seat, his throat tightening. He pressed his palms together, his lips parting, willing himself to speak. But as always, the words caught in his chest. Like birds trapped in a cage. Silence bound him. He could only watch as the officiant turned another page, the ceremony moving closer to the question that would bind his father to the woman forever. The boy's heartbeat quickened. He tried again, this time reaching forward, nearly rising from his seat. His small hand stretched toward his father's arm, but an usher gently pressed him back down with a polite smile, mistaking his urgency for restlessness. No one understood. No one listened. The bride's eyes flickered down at him once more. This time her lips curled, just barely, just enough for him to see. A smirk, a silent warning, "You can't stop this." The boy's chest burned. For the first time in his life, the silence felt unbearable, like a weight crushing every bone. His father stood so close, just steps away, but between them yawned an ocean. If he didn't break it now, he knew it would be too late. And somewhere deep inside, buried beneath years of silence, a voice stirred. The officiant's voice rang out solemnly, echoing across the grand hall. "If there is anyone here who has just cause why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace." The words seemed to hang in the air like a challenge, the kind that everyone in the room ignored, assuming no one would dare to interrupt such a perfect union. Guests smiled, craning their necks for a better view, some dabbing their eyes with tissues at the sight of the radiant bride and the billionaire standing hand in hand. The string quartet lowered their bows for the pause, ready to resume at the declaration of vows. And then, from the front pew, came a sound no one expected. A small, shaky voice broke through the silence. Don't." Heads turned at once. Gasps rippled through the guests as eyes fell on the boy in the miniature tuxedo, his tiny frame trembling, his lips parted in effort. The billionaire froze, blinking in disbelief. His son, his mute son, was standing now, fists clenched at his sides, his voice raw and weak but undeniable. The bride's fingers tightened around the billionaire's hand, nails digging in through his sleeve. Her smile faltered for the first time, though she tried to mask it quickly. But the boy's eyes were locked on his father, wide and brimming with tears, his voice cracking louder the second time. "Don't marry her." The entire hall erupted in stunned murmurs. The officiant looked as if he'd swallowed his own tongue. Guests leaned forward in shock, some covering their mouths, others whispering, "Did he just speak?" The boy's father stepped back, staring at his child as though seeing him for the first time. For 9 years he had never heard a word from his son, and now, at this moment, his silence had shattered. The boy's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard, his small voice trembling but growing stronger with every word. She doesn't love you, Daddy. She said, she only wants your money." Gasps turned into sharp cries of disbelief. Someone dropped their program, the thin paper fluttering to the floor. The boy's hands shook as he pointed a trembling finger at the bride, his chest heaving. She's mean to me when you're not here. She says, I'm useless. She laughed at me. His words broke into sobs, but he forced them out, each syllable striking like lightning in the silence. Please, Daddy, don't. The billionaire's face drained of color. He looked down at the woman beside him. Her smile had completely vanished now, her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes flashing with anger barely contained. She tried to laugh, forcing her voice light. He's confused, poor thing. He doesn't know what he's saying. Children imagine things. But the boy's voice rose above hers, desperate and pleading, louder than it had ever been in his life. I heard you. His cry echoed through the cathedral, bouncing against the marble pillars. You said you'd leave when you got the money. You don't care about us. You don't care about me. The guests turned in unison toward the bride, their eyes wide, murmurs turning into pointed whispers. Her face paled beneath the heavy veil of makeup. She tried to compose herself, but the billionaire had already pulled his hand away, his eyes narrowing as if every suspicion he'd ignored was now crystallizing in the light of his son's words. The boy's small chest rose and fell rapidly, tears streaming down his cheeks, his voice cracking under the strain. Please, Daddy, don't let her take you away from me. For a long moment, silence reigned again. The quartet sat frozen, instruments limp in their hands. The officiant lowered his book, uncertain. The guests stared at the billionaire, waiting for his reaction, their breaths caught in their throats. The father's hands trembled. He looked at his son who had never spoken a single word, not once in 9 years, and yet here he was, fighting through fear and silence to protect him. And then he looked at the bride, who stood rigid, her eyes darting like a cornered animal. The spell of perfection had broken, and the weight of the boy's words was too powerful to ignore. The room had gone so still it was as if time itself had stopped. The billionaire stood at the altar, his chest rising and falling as he stared at his son, the boy who had just shattered 9 years of silence with a truth too raw to deny. Every eye in the church was on him, waiting for his response. The bride's hand lingered near his sleeve, trembling slightly as she tried to cling to composure. Darling, she whispered urgently, her voice tight but still coated in sugar, he doesn't know what he's saying. He's frightened, overwhelmed. Children say all sorts of things when they're nervous. Her smile strained as she turned toward the guests, forcing a brittle laugh as if to dismiss the boy's words. But the cracks in her mask were too obvious now. The billionaire's jaw tightened. He looked at his son again, small, fragile, standing alone in front of a sea of faces, yet brave enough to raise his voice for the first time in his life. Tears stained the boy's cheeks, but his chin lifted stubbornly, his hands balled into fists. He hadn't spoken for himself, he had spoken for his father. That realization pierced the billionaire deeper than any accusation ever could. The groom took a step back from the bride, his hand slipping from hers. A collective murmur rippled through the hall. Is it true? He asked quietly, his voice carrying the weight of thunder. He didn't shout, but the intensity in his tone made the bride flinch. Tell me, did you say those things to my son? The bride's eyes darted, her face paling beneath her flawless makeup. She shook her head too quickly, her words tumbling out. Of course not. He's a child, he doesn't understand. He must have misheard something. Please, don't let this ruin. But the boy's voice cut across hers, louder this time, fueled by desperation. She called me useless. She said you'd never believe me. He pointed at her, his little body shaking with the effort. I'm telling the truth, Daddy. The guests erupted into whispers, scandal rippling across the pews like fire catching dry grass. Some gasped openly, others leaned close to each other, shaking their heads. The once perfect fairy tale wedding had become a public unraveling. The billionaire's gaze hardened as he looked at the woman he thought he would marry. He saw it now, every warning sign, every small detail he had ignored because he wanted to believe in love again. But love built on lies was nothing more than betrayal dressed in lace. Slowly, he reached for the microphone that the officiant held. His voice, deep and resonant, filled the hall. This wedding is over. A collective gasp rose. The bride staggered back, her eyes wide, her voice breaking into shrill panic. What? No, you can't. You can't humiliate me like this. Not here, not in front of everyone. He turned on her with a coldness that froze her where she stood. I will not bind myself to someone who treats my child with cruelty. My son has never spoken a word until today. Do you understand what that means? He broke years of silence, not for himself, but to protect me. That kind of courage cannot be ignored. And neither can your lies. The bride's face twisted, desperation replacing charm. She reached for him, but he stepped back. The audience parted as she stumbled forward, her voice rising. You'll regret this. Do you know who you're humiliating? Do you know what people will say? But no one was listening anymore. Ushers moved subtly to escort her out, and the murmurs of disgust followed her like shadows. Her glamorous image crumbled, leaving behind only a bitter, exposed truth. The billionaire set the microphone down and crossed the space between himself and his son. He knelt before the boy, lowering himself to his level despite the stares of hundreds of guests. Gently, he placed his hands on his son's small shoulders. I heard you, he said softly, his voice breaking for the first time. I'm so proud of you. You saved me. You gave me the greatest gift a father could ever receive, your voice. The boy's tears spilled faster, but this time they carried relief. He leaned forward, burying his face in his father's chest, clinging to him with the desperation of a child who had feared no one would ever listen. The billionaire wrapped his arms tightly around him, shielding him from the eyes of the world, as though he had finally understood what mattered most. The guests rose to their feet, not for a bride, not for a groom, but for a child who had spoken the truth when no one else dared. Applause swelled, not polite or restrained, but thunderous, echoing through the hall as if the cathedral itself recognized the bravery it had just witnessed. There was no wedding that day. No vows exchanged, no rings slipped onto fingers. Instead, there was something far greater, a bond between father and son, strengthened in the fire of truth. And for the billionaire, it was the only union that truly mattered.